America is lacking carpenters. But if you only look at the statistics, you'll miss what's really happening. A nearly 70-year-old craftsman is working alone. No heirs, no younger generation to carry on. When asked why, he replied briefly, "No one wants to do it anymore." That's where the real question begins. If a skill becomes scarce, according to market logic, its value must increase. But with carpentry, the opposite is happening. Stagnant wages, high physical pressure, the training system is narrowing. So, is this really a labor shortage crisis? Or is it the result of a decades-long economic choice? In this video, we will investigate how a profession that once built America is gradually disappearing, and what that says about the future of the very homes we live in. If you want to understand why the carpentry trade is quietly disappearing, we must go back to the time when it was a symbol of stability. After World War II, America entered an unprecedented construction boom. Millions of veterans returned, housing assistance programs expanded, and suburbs sprang up like ripples on the surface of a lake. Each house was not just four walls, it was a promise of a burgeoning middle class. In the period from 1950 to 1980, carpenters were every place. If you drive through a newly built residential area, there's a high chance that the person who framed that house is a man without a college degree, but with skills. And that skill is enough to pay the mortgage, buy a family car, raise children to university, and retire with respect. Imagine this. A family with just one income from carpentry could still own their own home. Nowadays, in many cities, two people working full-time also struggle to achieve the same. That is the level of change. The most important thing is not the numbers, but the structure of values. At that time, the value of physical labor is directly linked to economic rewards. The builders can live in the very community they help create. The profit chain has not yet been fragmented into too many intermediary layers. In other words, carpentry used to be a highway to the middle class. No need for advanced degrees, no need for complex networks, just skills, discipline, and time. So, what has changed? How did a profession that was once the foundation of the American dream become a job that many in the industry advise their children to avoid? In the next part, we will follow the moment when the flow of money began to shift, and sweat no longer accompanied rewards as it once did. What do you think has really broken this value chain? Salary? House prices? Or a deeper economic structure? Please share your perspective, as the answer could affect the very house you live in. If the 1950s, 1980s were the period of laying the foundation, then 2008 was when that foundation began to crack. The financial crisis did not just collapse banks, it freezes construction sites. A series of medium and large construction companies disappeared almost overnight. The unfinished projects lie still like concrete skeletons under the sun, and at the same time, hundreds of thousands of skilled workers fall into a state of waiting and gradually leave the industry. To visualize the scale, imagine a large stadium packed with people. That is the number of construction workers who could disappear from the market within just a few years after the crisis. And many of them never come back. The important thing here is not just losing a job, but rather the loss of trust. Before 2008, there was an unspoken agreement. If you worked hard, you would have a stable life. But when the housing bubble burst, that agreement shattered as well. The workers realized that their industry could freeze up after just 1/4 of poor financial reporting. From there, a wave of silent migration began. Many people are moving to factories, logistics, and industrial maintenance, fields that are less volatile. Some others have completely switched to a new path. When the construction market recovered, they were no longer there. Today, 75% of contractors report that the labor shortage is hindering growth. The entire industry is short of about 650,000 skilled workers. But this is not simply a lack of people. This is the result of a decade-long crisis of confidence. The question is, if an industry that once sustained the middle class can collapse after just one economic cycle, are the younger generations willing to bet their future on it? Do you think the 2008 crisis was just a temporary shock, or a moment that permanently changed how society values skilled labor? In the next part, we will see what happens when the construction industry recovers, but the wages of carpenters do not, and why that is the real breaking point of this story. If 2008 shook our faith, then the wage structure is the one that silently erodes the carpentry profession every day. Look at the numbers. In many areas of the U.S., carpenter, $5.50 hour. Electrician, $70, 90 hour. Plumber, $80, 130 hour. They are all skilled labor, working on site. But the difference can be double, even triple. Why? The answer lies in the structure of the job. A plumber can come to fix a leak in 2 hours and bill a few $100s. An HVAC technician replaces an air conditioning unit in half a day. Short, focused work, charged at a high hourly rate. Meanwhile, a carpenter building a wooden floor or deck might have to work 200, 300 continuous hours on a project. If they charge $90 hour, the total cost will leave the customers stunned. The market thus drives the price down. The paradox appears here. The longer the job takes, the harder it is to demand a high hourly rate. In other words, society is willing to pay a lot for a quick and specialized service, but hesitates to pay accordingly for a long-term job, even though the volume and responsibility are much greater. And the responsibility of a carpenter is not small at all. They may have to build wall frames, repair the rotten beam, install doors, windows, kitchen cabinets, complete the interior, handle each remaining small detail. They are the multitaskers of the construction site. But in the profit chain, they often stand at the lowest tier. Meanwhile, house prices in many cities have multiplied several times over the past 2 decades. A house can be worth hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, but the person who built that house frame might only earn an income equivalent to an average office job. This is not just a matter of salary. This is a valuation issue. If a skill becomes scarce, according to market logic, its value should increase. But in the case of carpenters, the value seems to be suppressed by the expectation that it shouldn't be that expensive. So the question is, who decides that? The market? Customers? Or is it a long-standing habit that home repairs should fit the budget? In the next part, we will look at another price, not on the bill, but on the bodies of those who do the work. If you find analyses like this useful, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next parts. And what do you think? Is the carpentry profession undervalued, or is this just the normal law of supply and demand? Salary is just part of the story. The rest doesn't show up on the quote, "It's in the medical records." A 6-year-old carpenter had knee surgery. Another person at the age of 52 said bluntly, "My back is pretty much done for." There are people aged 65 who have undergone nearly a dozen surgeries in their career, and those are not isolated cases. Meanwhile, the average retirement age for construction workers is around the early 60s, but the question is not when they retire, but whether their bodies can hold up until then. Unlike many high-income professions, carpenters often do not have a strong enough benefits package to compensate for long-term risks. When the body deteriorates, the income stops as well. This profession doesn't end when you want to quit. It ends when your knees, shoulders, or spine no longer allow you to continue. And here is the thought-provoking paradox. Society still needs houses to be repaired, roofs to be replaced, and frames to be erected, but the system relies on bodies that are gradually wearing out. If a skill takes 20 years to master, but the body can only withstand 25 years before serious deterioration, is that model sustainable? This raises a more difficult economic question. When wages do not sufficiently cover long-term health costs, is the market mispricing risk? In the next section, we will see why the younger generation observes all of this and actively chooses a different path. If you are interested in in-depth analyses of the labor market and the subtle shifts that are taking place, you can subscribe to the channel to follow the upcoming segments. And what do you think does the true cost of a house include the health of the person who built it? If 2008 shook confidence, then the changes in education before that had quietly narrowed the path into the profession. From the late 1980s to the early 2000s, America embarked on a nearly nationwide campaign. A 4-year college degree became the default path. High schools gradually reduced vocational classes. From woodworking, mechanics, to basic construction, the implicit but clear message: if you study well, you go to university. If not, you might consider manual labor. Data shows that during the period from 2007 to 2017, the number of students enrolling in construction-related classes sharply declined, before showing signs of a slight recovery recently. But a decade is enough to create a generational gap in the industry. The important thing here: young people are not turning their backs out of laziness. They follow the signals sent by the system. If society says that success is tied to offices, technology, and degrees, while manual labor is just a backup option, then people will move in that direction. This is not just an educational change. This is a cultural restructuring of how we define value. Intellectual labor is celebrated. Physical labor is gradually being pushed to the margins. So the question is, if a generation grows up without ever holding a saw or hammer in school, how can they see carpentry as a serious option? And what do you think, should the education system prioritize university? Or does it need to be rebalanced to bring manual trades back to their rightful place? In the next part, we will delve into another paradox. Even when young people want to enter the profession, is the training door really wide open? If the education system has narrowed the entry into the profession, then the training structure in the industry has added a second door, and not everyone has the key. The construction industry often talks about the labor shortage, but when we look closely at the selection and training mechanisms, a paradox emerges. Want to get into an apprenticeship? Many places require prior experience. Want to join the union? You need a sponsor, a guarantor. Imagine this. You stand in front of a door with a sign that says, "Now hiring." But when you knock on the door, you are asked, "Have you ever done this before?" If the answer is no, you go back to the starting point. This creates a loop. The industry says it lacks people. Young people want to try their hand, but the system is not flexible enough to absorb them quickly. Result? The supply is constrained not only by wages or working conditions, but also by the very structure of entry into the profession. This is not a story about right or wrong. Union and apprenticeship exist to protect quality and professional standards. But when the process becomes too difficult to access, it can inadvertently slow down the workforce regeneration process. So, the question arises, in the context of a shortage of hundreds of thousands of skilled workers, is the current training model open enough to attract the new generation? In the next section, we will look at another factor that is causing strong debate: labor costs, low price competition, and the impact of the global market. If you find these analyses helpful and want to follow the entire picture from multiple perspectives, you can subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming parts. When talking about the decline of the carpentry profession, there is a sensitive but unavoidable factor: the cost structure. The modern construction industry operates like a pyramid. At the top are the investors and the flow of capital. In the middle are the general contractor and the project developer. At the bottom are the workers directly erecting the house frame, nailing each wooden beam. The problem is, the pressure for profit is often passed down from top to bottom. When material costs rise, borrowing rates increase, and land prices soar, the entire system must tighten up. But that tightening rarely starts from the top of the pyramid. It starts from the bottom, where labor costs are squeezed down to keep the total selling price from exceeding the market's acceptable threshold. In that context, a workforce willing to work for lower wages naturally becomes the economical choice. The market doesn't ask where you come from. The market asks, how much does it cost? Imagine a house worth $800,000. The buyer sees the final number, but within that structure are dozens of subcontractors, each layer retaining a portion of the profit margin. When the flow of money passes through many layers of intermediaries, the remaining portion for the direct workers becomes increasingly thin. And the paradox arises. A house may be worth millions of dollars, but the person who built its framework cannot afford to buy a similar one in the same area. This is not just a story about labor competition. This is a story about how value is distributed in the supply chain. When profits are concentrated at the management and financial levels, physical labor becomes the most adjustable variable. The question arises, if house prices are rising faster than the income of carpenters, and profit margins are retained at the top, who is really benefiting from the real estate boom? In the next part, we will look at the final consequences, the quality of construction, and consumer trust. When skilled labor leaves, the consequences do not appear immediately. The house is still being built. The roof is still being thatched. The door still opens and closes normally. But the change begins in the small details. Many homeowners share an interesting comparison. Houses built in 1959, tight wooden frames, straight beams, doors that close with a solid thud. Houses built in 2016, gaps around the door frames. Squeaky floors, hastily finished. This is not a romantic nostalgia. This is the effect of the pressure for faster and cheaper. When profit margins are squeezed, progress becomes a priority. And when the skilled workforce thins out, the complex tasks are assigned to less experienced teams. The lack of high skill does not cause the house to collapse immediately. It creates future costs, repairs sooner, more maintenance, and even the need to replace the entire structure earlier than expected. And this is the dangerous spiral. Quality decreases. Trust decreases. Consumers look for more cost-cutting measures. Pressure is pushed back onto the workers. But the story doesn't stop at materials or techniques. It touches on a deeper point passing down the craft. Many veteran carpenters candidly say, I don't want my child to follow this profession. A profession doesn't disappear when there's no more work. It disappears when the people in the profession no longer believe it is worth continuing. So if the quality of the work declines and the craft is interrupted, what will happen in the next 10, 20 years? And now we will touch on the biggest question. Is this really a shortage of carpenters? Or is it the result of refusing to pay the true value of their work? In basic economics, there is an almost immutable principle: scarcity price increase. If oil is scarce, the price of oil increases. If semiconductor chips are in short supply, the prices of electronic devices increase. But with carpentry, that logic seems to be bent. The American construction industry is currently short hundreds of thousands of skilled workers. Carpenters top the list of shortages. According to market theory, this should be the golden time for labor prices to rise sharply. However, the reality is different. Instead of saying prices need to be adjusted, the system often refers to this as a labor shortage. Language changes the way we perceive issues. Labor shortages sound like a natural phenomenon, but if a scarce skill does not see a corresponding increase in value, it is no longer a natural phenomenon. It is an economic choice. If society wants the younger generation to say it's worth pursuing this profession, then the financial signal must be clear. Not $60,000 a year, but rather an income level sufficient to compensate for physical risk, economic cycles, and current living costs. If not, the market will adjust itself in a harsher way. Longer wait times, repair costs suddenly increase. The supply of skilled labor is further shrinking. So is this a failure of market forces, or have we not truly allowed those forces to operate? In the next part, we will look to the future, when scarcity is no longer an abstract concept, but becomes a specific bill for each household. If everything we have just analyzed is correct, then the future is no longer a hypothesis. It is a simple calculation. Imagine the scenario 5-10 years from now. You need to repair the roof after a storm. You make a call. No one answers the phone. Or there is, but the appointment is in 4 to 6 months. And the quote? Higher by 1.5 times, even double compared to now. This is not a bleak outlook. This is the supply-demand logic when an essential skill becomes as rare as a skilled tradesperson in a small town. Currently, about 1/5 of the construction workforce is over 55 years old. If most of them leave the industry in the next decade without a strong successor class, the market will self-correct, but in a rather unpleasant way. The waiting time is prolonged. Costs are rising rapidly. Quality is hard to control when high skill becomes a rare resource. The question is no longer whether there is a shortage of carpenters, but rather, how do we want to pay the price? Gradually pay through higher wages and better conditions starting now, or pay a much larger bill when scarcity reaches its peak. In the final part, we will return to the central question. Can this slow death be reversed, or is it too late? This story is not just about the carpenter. It speaks about how a society values those who lay its foundations. When home repairs are no longer enough to sustain the repairer, the problem does not lie with the individual. It lies in the structure, in the way money flows, in the economic choices made over decades. If the younger generation looks at carpentry and says it's not worth it, that's not laziness. That's a calculation. So, the question for you is, are we witnessing a temporary market adjustment or a long-term change in how skilled labor is valued? And if you are a homeowner, are you willing to pay more to keep skilled workers in the market? Please share your perspective in the comments section. Discussions like these truly clarify the issue. If you want to continue exploring the economic stories behind daily life, from the labor market to real estate and the value chain, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next analyses. Note: the content in the video is analytical and commentary based, relying on public sources and market observations. This is not financial, legal, or career advice. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next topic.